Good morning. This is Coffee and Kavanah. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, Valley Beth Shalom, and I'm delighted to spend a few moments with you this morning. I would like to welcome you, and I pray that you're well and taking care of yourself, even if you're solitary confinement and quarantine. You still know that you are connected and part of a community of friends. This morning, Thursday, is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It is the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, and Nisan is the Hebrew month in which the holiday of Pesach is celebrated. According to the Torah, this is the beginning of the process of our redemption. On the first day of Nisan, the Israelites were told to go and find a lamb that would become the paschal sacrifice, the lamb whose blood would protect their door lintels as the angel of death crossed over. So we begin our preparations for Pesach. You'll see, if you do make it into the supermarket, stacks of matzah and jars of gefilte fish and all of the provisions for Pesach. We're gathering together, if not in person, then online, to celebrate Pesach, to prepare a Haggadah, to prepare a Seder, and to prepare to celebrate our freedom together. All of Pesach, all of the holiday of Passover, is motivated by one line that occurs in the 10th chapter of Mishnah Psachim, the Mishnah, the code of Jewish law that governs Jewish life. And the laws of Pesach include this one remarkable line: B'chol dor vador, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa b'Mitzrayim. In every generation, every one of us must see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt. This is a radical demand. It's not enough to remember the Exodus. It's not enough to commemorate the Exodus. It's important that the Exodus become ours. We're taking historical experience and making it personal memory. I was there. I tasted the bitterness of Pharaoh's slavery, and I crossed the Red Sea after Moses, and I felt the glory and exhilaration of freedom, and I saw God's hand in history. I saw God's hand in history, and I was convinced and persuaded. It was proven to me that might does not make right, that at certain moments of history there is a redress, there is justice, and right can overcome, right can make might. This is the great glory of Pesach, and everything we do in Pesach is a reiteration or a fulfillment, actually, of that particular dictum. On Pesach, we're going to eat what they ate. On Pesach, we're going to feel what they felt. The Seder that we're going to sit down to in 2 weeks, the Seder is, in fact, a recreation, a reiteration, a rehearsal of the last night we were in Pesach, the last night we were in Egypt. That last night, with the blood on the door lintel, and the angel of death crossing over our homes, and the screams of anguish in the night, and our own sense of exhilaration. We were slaves. Our parents were slaves. Our grandparents were slaves. Tomorrow we might be free. What was that like? What kind of holy terror, what kind of remarkable excitement animated that particular moment? And that's what we're going to do at the Seder. That's the moment we're going to recreate at the Seder. And the entire week of Passover, we're going to recreate the experience of our ancestors both in slavery and then in freedom. Matzah, you remember, in the Seder has two meanings. At the beginning of the Seder, we say, halach ma'anya, this is the poor bread that slaves eat. At the end of the Seder, matzah becomes the bread we carried with us because we didn't have time to let the bread rise. It's the bread of redemption. Similarly, the charoset is the mortar that we use to build the pyramids of Pharaoh, and at the same time it is the sweet relish that mellows the sting of the maror, the pain of slavery, with the promise of redemption. Ki'ilu, the word right in the middle of the sentence, Bechol dor vador, in every generation, chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. We have to see ourselves ki'ilu. The Hebrew word ki'ilu means as if. As if is a wonderful phrase if you think about it. It means that we engage in a game of pretend. It means that religion partakes of a human endeavor called play. Play is a way of suspending disbelief and entering into a circumstance, a situation. When I go to a play, when I sit in the audience and I watch Romeo and Juliet, I forget that I'm watching actors on a stage in my hometown. Instead, I become someone sitting in the town square of Verona in the 14th century, watching these two young lovers, Montagues and Capulets, trying to work out their life together. Play. When I go to a sporting event, I forget that I'm watching paid athletes perform in front of me, and I become an advocate for one side or the other. I cheer for my home team. In play, we become part of a scenario. We suspend the world we're living in and step into a constructed world. And that constructed world can often change us. It can often make us different people. That's what play is. Now, this is a particular kind of play, the Seder, because it takes this Ke'ilu idea one step further. We have the power to enter into the experience of other people, even if they're not our personal experiences. This is called empathy. And if you want to know the truth, this is the true human superpower. I can't fly, can't bend steel in my bare hands. I'm not faster than a speeding bullet. But I, as a human being with a heart, can feel the pain of another, can share the joy of another, can step into the experience of another. I can project myself into someone else's experience and feel what it's like to have been them. I can enter into somebody else's experience. That's what Pesach does for us. We engage in this play of joining the Seder, of joining the Exodus from Egypt. And thereafter, we are different. Whenever we encounter someone whose experience reminds us of our own experience as slaves in Egypt, we are moved. We are claimed. It becomes part of us. When I see the homeless guy on the street, I don't just see him as a social problem in my town. I don't see him as a health problem or a housing problem or a food problem or a problem. When I see a homeless man on the street, I see myself. I was that man. I was that woman. I belonged to that family. I was there because I was a slave in the land of Egypt. So over and over and over again, the Torah teaches us you will protect the widow, the orphan, the stranger, because you were slaves in the land of Egypt. You will feel their pain because you know their pain, having been slaves in the land of Egypt. And therefore, you will leave the corners of your fields unharvested. You will not pick up the produce that is left behind in the harvest. You will set aside certain amounts for the poor and the needy and the bereft and the dispossessed in your community because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. The Torah rests upon, fundamentally, an ethic of empathy. It's not an ethic of prudence. It's not, you don't do these things. You don't take care of the poor because it's socially good policy. You don't take care of the poor because you don't like living among poor people. You take care of the poor because you were poor, because there's still a part of you which resonates to that experience, and we feel claimed by their pain. We feel claimed by their need. We feel claimed by their sense of being dispossessed and powerless and voiceless in this great society. We were slaves in the land of Egypt, and Ki'ilu, we become part of the experience of everyone who shares that degradation and humiliation. There's a remarkable phrase in the 24th chapter of Deuteronomy. It says, you will remember the stranger, the widow, the orphan. And then there's a little detail that's added. You will not take the widow's garment in pawn. What does that mean? You will not take the widow's garment in pawn. There's a whole movie in that. You just have to unpack it. Once upon a time, she was a wealthy matron with a powerful, important, wealthy husband, beautiful children, a wonderful life of comfort and leisure, and she lived in a wonderful home. And she had art on her walls, and she wore gowns, couture, and she had jewels, and she had everything that a matron in society could want. And then he died. And then the money stopped coming. And perhaps there was a tax lien, or perhaps there was a criminal judgment, or perhaps there was a business failure. And one by one she has to sell off all of the parts of her wealth, all of the elements of her position and her prestige and her place in society, the art, the gowns, the jewels. And then finally she sells off the home. And then when she has nothing left to sell to feed her children, well, what does she sell then? Don't take a widow's garment in pawn. Yes, she sells herself because she would give up her own dignity as a woman in order to feed her children, to fulfill her obligations as a mother. And what does Torah say? Torah says, you must not let any human being fall to that level of degradation. Why? Because that's you. Because that's who you were. Because that's what you remember. Because that's what you feel in your bones when you remember your time in Egypt. Now, how you do that, that's a policy question. That's for politicians and for analysts and for economists and for advocates to figure out. But the ethic of empathy that drives that particular policy has to be felt in your heart. Why? Because bechol dor vador, in every generation, every one of us has to see himself and herself as if we experienced and tasted the bitterness of slavery and we knew the exhilaration of freedom. That's what we start with today. And one more note, of course. In these moments of social isolation, as we feel the fear of the angel of disease outside and hope that we're safe here within, this next week is going to get particularly difficult because now the fun of the thing is sort of worn off, and the fear of economic collapse, the fear of the disease, the tediousness of being cooped up at home, the sense of being crushed on top of each other, this is going to start to get to us. That ethic of empathy applies right now. We must feel each other. We must feel each other's pain and boredom. We must feel each other's needs. We must make every single effort to protect each other at this moment, to be more forgiving and patient and kind with one another. That's what we learned. Ki'ilu. That's the ability to project ourselves into the experience of another and to take responsibility for each other and care for each other. There's a sweet little story about my favorite Jewish philosopher, Abram Joshua Heschel. I think the greatest Jewish philosopher of the 20th century. Heschel, of course, lived in New York City, taught at JTS, my alma mater. And there were a lot of panhandlers on the streets in the years that Heschel lived there. And the story is that he was walking home from shul one day with one of his students, and a panhandler came to him. It was Shabbos. And a panhandler came and said, if you got $1 you could spare for a guy to get a sandwich and a cup of coffee. And Heschel looked at this ragged man, this ragged, homeless, hungry man, and he sighed a painful sigh and reached out and took the man's arm in his own and said, my brother, today is the Holy Shabbos and I don't carry money. But my brother, if you'll meet me here tomorrow, I promise I'll have enough for you to care for you for quite a while. And the beggar, he just smiled and said, oh, Rabbi, I'm sorry, it is Shabbos. But you don't need to bring me anything. You called me your brother, and that's quite enough. That's quite enough. Today, let us reach across to brothers and sisters and remind them that we're in this together and care for one another. Be well, be safe, be whole. Have a quiet week and a good Shabbos. Look for VBS programs on vbs.org, the VBS at Home logo. Help our food bank by bringing a few cans of food if you make it into Gelson's or Vons, and take care of each other. Be empathetic, be sensitive, be kind.